since you are here. I want to be respect time. So, welcome everyone. Welcome to is this the, I'm sorry, my brain's not working. This is a second. Yeah, second week of the Thanksgiving box, right? Yeah, it is a second week. Yeah, second tasting of the second Thanksgiving box. We're tasting this guy today. This white wine. There's only one white wine in the box. So if you don't have a white wine, you open the wrong bottle. But yeah, that's what we're tasting today. Uh, 2023 Spinning Wheel. You can have it all. Virginia white wine is what we're tasting. And in case you should have gotten an email, but in case you didn't know, we have the winemaker himself joining us today, Peter. Um, but I don't really have any other announcement per se today. Case Club is closed. Everything is, oh no, Case Club, that's the only announcement I have. Case Club is closing tomorrow. So for those of you who want to put your orders in, do it now before you forget. I'm going to close it at noon tomorrow. So get your orders in now. Let me know. These are all the California 3.0 wines that we tasted last month, and then all the other things that didn't make it into the box for one reason or another, but put on there. So get those into me ASAP if you are interested. If not, all good too. But outside of that, I don't really have oh, and I am leaving for Morocco, in case you didn't know. I think most of you know this already. I'm leaving for Morocco on Friday, this Friday, and then I'm gonna be gone, and I'll be back on the 20. Let me look at the calendar exactly so I don't give you the wrong date. I'll be back on 27th of October. So next week on the 16th, you are going to get a recording of our third wine. And on the 23rd, we're actually going to take a break because there are 5 Wednesdays in October. And then we'll wrap up the Thanksgiving box with the last wine on the 30th. So yeah, just so you know, next week there's no live tasting. It's just that I'm just gonna make a recording before I go. I'm gonna send it to you, and so you get that on the 16th. And 23rd, there's no recording or no tasting Zoom or anything. So we're gonna take a break on the 23rd, and then we're gonna wrap it all up on the 30th, just so you know. And last but not least, 6 Foot Wine Club is committed to donating 1% of its gross revenue to an organization whose mission statement aligns with its values. And this month, I've chosen DC Food Project. So if you want to donate alongside 6 Foot Wine Club or want to learn about what they do, drop the chat link in the chat box. So check it out. Besides that, I don't have any other questions. Any questions about any of the logistics or things I just went over before we get into the wine? About next month or whatnot. Next month is going to be New Year's Eve sparkling, by the way. So it's going to be a bubbles box. So yeah, the bubbles box is coming your way next month, in case you're wondering. Cool. Hearing none, we're going to move into the wine. In case you're just joining us, we are tasting this guy, 2023 Spinning Wheel. You can have it all, Virginia white wine. And we actually have the man himself who made the wine, or one of the 3 people who were responsible for making this fun, delicious number. But in case you're not familiar with Peter, let me give you a little background. By the way, Peter, I never asked you this question, and I'm terribly sorry, but how do I pronounce your last name?
That's a very good question. My last name is pronounced Szilagyi.
Szilagyi.
Yeah.
Okay.
I always tell people it's like if you swap the M in the word salami with a hard G, then you're golden. You're solid.
Okay. I just put Peter's name in the chat box just in case you were like, how do you not know his last name? I'm like, you look at that and you tell me how to pronounce that. All right. All right. So Peter Szilagyi is a winemaker and beverage professional currently based in Washington, D.C., where they manage sales for DI Wine, a small, mostly French natural wine importer. He's the one who's responsible for bringing us such delicious numbers as Rebel Cider, as well as a
Thanks a
Licorne
lot.
Crema de Limon. Those are the wines that I got from Peter. So in case you're wondering, that's the guy. Their winemaking journey started in the Finger Lakes of Central New York State in 2016. Since then, they've worked in winemaking regions in Germany, Argentina, their home state of Colorado, and most recently, Virginia, where they co-founded Spinning Wheel Wines in 2022. Peter's been I've always enjoyed having Peter come by. We've always kind of geeked out on some wines, and he deals with a very small boutique wine book that I really enjoy. And he's just a cool, chill dude. Like there's a lot of I don't know, type A, I'm the shit kind of a personality that exists in the wine world, and Peter is not one of them, which I would have always appreciated about Peter. So without further ado, welcome to the show, I guess, Peter, or what to call this, but welcome to the tasting, Peter.
Thank you, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Now you see what it is that I do. This is what I do with the wines that you sell me.
Amazing.
Um, so Peter, today I thought, as much about the wine as it is about you. People to get to know the people behind the wine, some story behind the wine, and it's a pretty cool project that you're doing here. But before we get into any of that, I thought let's start with Peter. As the bio said a little bit, you're from Colorado. I know your initial kind of background or entry point into the wine world was through production. So tell us a little bit about how you got into wine from Colorado, then ended up on a Finger Lakes, and then how you ended up in DC.
Yeah, for sure. Um, yeah, coming from Colorado is maybe not the most, intuitive background for someone in wine. It's not the first place you think of when you think of the wine industry, for sure. There is a very small and quite interesting wine industry in the state of Colorado. There's a couple of wine growing regions on the western side of the state. They're really like the commercial wine industry in earnest started not until the 70s, although some folks have been making wine in that area for much longer than that. So it's a very small and young wine industry, and most of it's not particularly good or particularly bad. It just sort of is, as is the case in most regions, actually, probably. But there are some really cool projects happening there. So yeah, we can talk about that in a second. But yeah, I was growing up in Colorado, and it people kind of always ask me like, how'd you get into wine? I grew up in the Denver area. There's no winemaking to speak of at all in that region. um, I think it's a lot of things. I always grew up. Some of it's like a different kind of family forces, I think, got me interested. My dad is Austrian, and so Austria has a big wine culture, and there's kind of when we spend time with his family, there's always wine on the table. It's a big part of social life, big part of family life. So I think it was just like there's something that I always kind of took for granted as something that was like important and supposed to be there and a part of life. And my mom is a horticulturist, or was when she was still working. And so, I grew up, thinking about agriculture and plants and all the time as well. So it's kind of just like a easy leap to combine those two and study viticulture. And that's what I did when I went to college. The college I attended had a winemaking and viticulture degree program, and so I started taking coursework in that, and I was just absolutely hooked. And that was in New York State in the Finger Lakes. So it was basically just no looking back from that. I was enamored, and I found in wine, everything. I think that one of the things I love about wine is that it kind of scratches every imaginable itch when it comes to curiosity and things that you could want to learn. There's so much culture and history, and it's certainly an artistic expression, but there's also so much real hard science, both in a hands-on agricultural sense and in a like you can get as nerdy and geeky in an abstract kind of like chemistry sense as you want. So there's no kind of curiosity that you can have that you can't kind of satisfy diving into wine, which is I think what keeps me always coming back to it.
Awesome. How did you end up in DC from after all that?
Yeah, so this ties back to Colorado actually. Um, I uh, I worked I learned winemaking in the Finger Lakes. The Finger Lakes, since sort of the mid 20th century, has tried really hard to kind of imitate a number of German winemaking regions. Maybe you folks have talked about that before. And uh, it's sort of unclear. I mean, it's sort of the future of the Finger Lakes is a little unclear on whether, that's like the best way forward for the region. Some folks do it very, very well. Some of the wines from the Finger Lakes that interest me a little more nowadays are actually kind of breaking from that comparison. But because of that, I got really familiar with German varieties. I went to work in Germany in a few different regions, and yeah, I think um, after that kind of like continuation of that cool climate viticulture that I'd learned, I was ready for something different and something kind of new and strange to me. And I kind of started thinking seriously about moving back home to Colorado. Um, Very, very, very different climate than Germany or New York
Mhm.
State, and it came with some different challenges that I was really eager to jump on. So I ended up working at this place called Jackrabbit Hill Farm, which is in Western Colorado, and it's a crazy, crazy vineyard. It's 18 acres of grapes planted on volcanic soils at 6,200 feet elevation. It's a very special, unique place. Um, and while I was there, the company I work for now, DI Wine, started distributing Jackrabbit Hill in New York, in the state of New York. So that's how I first met my now colleagues. They came out to the farm for a producer visit, and we hosted them for a few days, and just hit it off, and I kept in touch with them as I was working there, and um, as I when I by the time that I'd worked there for a while, I kind of started realizing like there were some big gaps in my wine industry experience. And um, in the state of Colorado, you're allowed to sell as a producer. You're allowed to sell directly to restaurants, bars, bottle shops, stuff like that. So I did a little bit of that for Jackrabbit Hill when I was working there, and I really liked it. And I realized like, oh wow, there's a whole other side of the wine industry that I know almost nothing about. Um, I've the sales thing was super new to me, but I really liked it. I liked meeting with buyers and telling, the story of the wine and, explaining why they should care about what we do. And so, my now colleagues at DI around that time, um, kind of reached out and they were like, we're trying to open a market in DC. We want someone to sell our wine in DC. And they had known because we'd kept in touch that, um, my partner at the time had like some connections to DC and had some career connections to DC, and they were kind of like testing the waters to see if I was interested. And I was like, hell yeah, let's do it. I'll do it. I'll move. So I had never lived in DC before, and I had spent maybe a total of like 5 days in DC my whole life before moving here. But yeah, I moved to take
Mhm.
that job and kind of learn the distribution and importing side of things, which I'm having a blast with. I love doing that. But it became pretty clear after about a year in DC, it became very clear to me that I missed the production of it all and getting my hands dirty, um, or getting my hands sticky, as it were, when it comes to grapes. Um, and that was sort of the impetus of founding Spinning Wheel, is that I just like I had this need to be in the vineyard and in the cellar, and had to make it happen. So what do you do if you live in DC and you need to make some wine? Is you go to Virginia.
Yeah, it makes sense. And I say this with most amount of utmost respect and admiration for what you do. But like, I can't imagine you selling wine for anyone else but Dion. It's just like so DI, for those of you who are not familiar, the wines that they import are very small scale, like really boutique wineries. That's who they specialize in. It's almost way too small for a lot of these distributors to really pick up in DC. And these are the producers that DI choose to work with, which is admirable work. But I can't imagine you working for like someone like Wimbo or like some these big companies where you have to go, you know. hit some brand mandates or corporate mandates of having to sell certain wines and whatnot. So
Yeah,
yeah,
I
it's
mean,
a good fit for you.
yeah, I have not, when I think about the kind of wine that those sort of distributors sell, in theory, I have really nothing against like bigger production, less artisanal wines. If they're, farmed responsibly, I would much like from an ethical values standpoint, I would much rather, drink a big production, well farmed, organically farmed wine, than I would, something that's farmed irresponsibly, but is, super hands-on in a small company. Um, but so I'm glad those wines exist, and I'm glad they exist at price points that make them more accessible to folks. I think that's an important kind of segment of
Yeah.
the world of wine. But I don't know. I mean, I think I personally, maybe to a fault, am a bit of an idealist, and I would have a very hard time, you know, spending every day of my life talking about wines that I don't like deeply care about. And yeah, the portfolio I sell, the importer I work for, like I said, it's all very small production, and producers we know personally by name, and folks I can, like, if I have a question about the wine, I text them and ask them the question, and we chat about it. It's
Yeah.
different from working with a big company, and that kind of keeps me engaged. So yeah, I think yeah, you're probably right. I have a bit of an idealistic streak that would make it hard for me to work for some of those other distributors, and yeah, the idealism gets me into trouble. Like when it makes me do things like start a winery in Virginia.
Love it. I mean, also, I props to you. I don't know if you're still doing this, but are you still at Sunny's? Are you still running the wine program at Sunny's and
Oh, I stopped doing that in
when
uh
you went to Argentina?
yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So for those of you who didn't know, Peter also ran the wine program at Sunny's and No Kisses Bar in what is that neighborhood? Parkview is that what it's called?
Yeah, Heights.
Petworth.
Yeah.
Yeah. Until he went to go work harvest in Argentina this year. So you've kind of really, I admire that you kind of jumped in and you got the sales side, and then you also got the retail buyer side under, experience under your belt and all of that. So that's cool.
Too much. I was driving myself nuts a little bit, but it was great.
Yeah. So let's talk about spinning wheel. So starting spinning, I know you started this with two of your other friends back in 22. Tell us a little bit more about um, yeah, how it all came about, and yeah, just tell us more about spinning wheel, the beginning of spinning
Totally. Yeah, so Spinning Wheel is a collaboration between well, there's three of us. So it's me, and then my partners in this project, Alyssa Anderson and Perry Connor. Um, it's such a small project, and it's very hands-on, so we all kind of have our strengths, but we all do a little bit of everything, which is nice. So I kind of take the lead a little bit in the cellar, and uh, Perry takes a little bit more of the kind of control when it comes to sales and administration stuff, especially sales in Virginia, which is where they live. Um, and Alyssa does a lot of the kind of like the design, the label, the way that the wine looks visually is sort of her vision. But again, it's so small, and we all have production experience, so we're all very hands-on in the cellar. Uh, and yeah, it just kind of came together. It's one of these things that was kind of spontaneous. Alyssa and Perry are two people who kind of share, we all share the sort of same kind of like ethical values from a farming perspective, and kind of aesthetic values. And I've been chatting with both of them kind of independently for a number of years about, like, what would it take to start our own project? What would that look like? Should we do it? Where should that be? And so um, when I kind of just got the bug, and realized I had to make it happen in 2022, I called them both up, and they said, "Yeah, we're on board. Let's do it." So um, Alyssa, actually still to this day, works part-time in the Hudson Valley. She is
Mm,
assistant cider maker, and she makes some mead as well. Some of the best mead I've ever had. It's not a category of beverage I know a lot about.
yeah,
Uh, but she makes some really cool mead in the Hudson Valley. And she works with this project called Greenpoint Cidery, which is owned by this
yeah.
woman, Nika Carlson, who does really cool stuff. So that's Alyssa's production background. We met when we were both living in the Finger Lakes, which is kind of the cider capital of North America, in my opinion, some of the best cider out there. So that's how she got very interested in fermenting apples and pears. And Perry and I actually met right here in DC. Perry's production experiences in Virginia, works for some big names that you might know, like Michael Shaps, and then more West Coast stuff uh, in Sonoma and in the Willamette Valley, and also in Australia. So all three of us have very different backgrounds as far as like regions we've worked in, and styles that we've kind of produced before, which I think gives some really good balance to the project, because we all have, different experience, and we've all having worked in very different places, like we've encountered very different challenges, and sometimes something will come up that stymies two of us and the other one has the answer. So it's a really nice, like, collaborative kind of, we're always working together, and everyone in the project has full autonomy to do what they think they need to do when they're working on the wine. There's no like we all trust each other to make the right decision, and it's a really fun exercise. It's really interesting exercise in trust sometimes. It's like, if I can't get at the cellar one day, and like I know they're there, I know they're there doing the thing, and they might not be making the decisions I'm making, but I know they're going to do what's best for the wine, which is it's like, um yeah, I feel like it's taught me a lot, because it's crazy to be like so trusting with something you care so much about.
I was gonna say, what happens? I mean, is it purpose that you guys kept it at a odd number? So if there's a disagreement, you can at least get to vote, and then two people agree on it.
I mean, not on purpose, but we have run into that a couple times. I mean,
Yeah,
there's no collaboration that lasts very long at all that doesn't involve some disagreement.
yeah,
I think we're all pretty agreeable people ultimately, which helps a lot. But yeah, I mean, there've been times where like the two of them have liked an idea or made a decision that I didn't love, but it's like, oh, sure, well, that's what we're doing then. You two feel passionate
yeah,
about that, and they have, they're talented and have good taste, and so I'm like, well, sure, we'll try that out.
yeah. Right on. Um, this is something you actually told me when you tasted me on this wine. This is the first time I tasted your wine, and before we even get into kind of nitty gritty, the minutia of the spinning wheels and what you guys do, the general kind of mission statement of what you guys are trying to do in Virginia. And
Totally.
you had particularly said something to me about how you feel like we, as a wine community, as well as winemakers, have been asking maybe perhaps a misleading or a wrong question in Virginia, and you guys are trying to ask a different question, which I thought was really striking and compelling. So tell us a little bit more about what it is that you guys are trying to do in Virginia with spinning wheel.
Yeah, happily. Um, yeah, from our perspective, and this is sort of the kind of guiding question that informs everything we do at Spinning Wheel. From our perspective, for the majority of its history, the wine industry in Virginia, and to a lesser extent, only because it's smaller as an industry, but very much along the same kind of lines. The wine industry in Maryland has asked sort of what we think are the wrong questions about wine, which is to say, most folks ask, how can I make the kind of wine that I already know I like um, work here in this place? And they're trying to recreate wine styles from elsewhere in the world. And they're trying to farm grape varieties that are better suited to climates that don't look like our climate looks. Um, this is not to say that it's so black and white, so binary as to mean that like people who ask that question are, yeah, intrinsically doing something wrong. I don't think that that's, I'm not trying to pit us against them by any means. And I think that there are folks who are farming European grape varieties, big, the big sort of big name classic grapes that everyone knows, thoughtfully and well, and in a way that respects the biodiversity of the vineyard and the soil health. But the fact of the matter is that it's incredibly, incredibly difficult to do to farm these European grape varieties in the Mid-Atlantic. And so we look at the situation and think, well, if there's this thing that's so hard to do in line with our values, and there's a way to circumvent that challenge entirely, why throw ourselves against a wall and try to make this happen? So at our disposal, as opposed to all these European grape varieties, there's an entire diverse palette of hybrid grapes and native grapes. So for those of you who don't know, the European wine grape is called Vitis vinifera. It's one species of the genus Vitis. And on the east coast of the US, there's several species of native Vitis grapes. Some of these can make pretty palatable wine all on their own without any sort of selection or manipulation. Others bring certain palatable or appealing traits to the table, certain flavors that are interesting, or certain, viticultural characteristics, hardiness in the vineyard, resistance to disease, but maybe on their own they wouldn't make a balanced and compelling wine. However, if you hybridize them with European grapes, you can kind of get a best of both worlds situation where you get some of the winemaking characteristics that are appealing about European grapes, and you get some of the hardiness and disease resistance from these native grapes. And these sort of grapes are what the North American wine industry was based on for most of its existence until Prohibition. And people liked the wines. In fact, people loved the wines. They got exported from the U.S. to Europe, where there was a demand for these wines. That's how much people enjoyed them. And so Prohibition happened. Most of these vineyards got ripped out. And by the time that winemaking got a foothold again in the U.S., tastes had changed. And, those folks who could afford to drink wine during Prohibition were drinking, were traveling abroad and drinking, or were drinking smuggled wine that was quite expensive. And so developed a palate for European styles. And as a result of that, kind of came to see these American grapes as lesser. But based on the kind of idea that up until that point, folks had loved these types of wine, so much so that even wine drinkers in Europe were importing them to drink and enjoy them there. We kind of figured that maybe these hybrid and native grapes are making worse wine in the modern era, only because people expect them to make worse wine and therefore plant them in worse vineyard sites, or use them, for their kind of least thoughtful bottlings and blends as sort of their cheaper option that they're going to put less love and care into. And then it becomes, of course, a self-fulfilling prophecy. So our question, as opposed to that question of how do I make what I already know I like work here in the Mid-Atlantic, our question is, how do we take what already likes to grow here in the Mid-Atlantic, these hybrid and native grapes, and make something that we like with this fruit? So it's very much an open-ended question. We don't have, we don't start from a style of wine that we have decided in advance we want to make. We start instead from this fruit that grows well here, that can be farmed responsibly. And we just sort of let the fruit lead us and make the wine that we think it wants to make. And we work with growers who are putting that kind of love and attention into these grapes that other folks would reserve only for their European grape varieties. And we think that the difference really shows in the glass.
See, for those of you who are wondering, what's the big deal? But to me, what Peter just talked about is a complete paradigm shift in terms of how we approach and how we think about producing wine. Most of what Peter talks about, most of the industry is quite frankly reverse engineered. There's a certain style of wine, and then we try to get it there by planting certain varieties at a certain place and using certain winemaking technique to get it there. But really what we're talking about is completely flip that on its head and do it the other way, where we pick out the best grapes that do well on their own, and then just make sure they don't fall apart and make sure we make the most palatable, most delicious wines that we possibly can. It's a complete different way of approach. And quite frankly, you know, I told Peter this as well, but I was skeptical when he first tasted me on this wine, right before he tasted me on this wine, because you know, there's also some bad rap about hybrid grapes, and some of it is justified as well. There's many bad examples of hybrid grape wines that exist out there. So when he told me that this is what he made, this is what he's working on, and like I want you to taste it, and I was like, oh, okay, Peter, well, let's see. I mean, all that, you know, cerebral thinking is great, but like wine also has to be good. But then as soon as I tasted it immediately, I was like, holy shit, this is fantastic. This is great. Like it's and I said to Peter, but this is, and I said this in the email, this is like, if somehow in my head, like this reminds me so much of Alsace. And it's like, you know, we talked about it when we're tasting it. It's if like Alsace and like Rhone White had like a bastard child, and then it spent, you know, we went to a boarding school in Loudoun County in Virginia and grew up there. Like this is what that kid will be in a wine form. But yeah, it's a super cool shit. The fact that you guys are doing it, it's not just all, you know, aesthetics and trying to be cool kids and hipster cool kids, but you guys, you know, you guys have like an actual mission behind what you guys are doing, and that's super admirable and super respectful. So I just want to give you some props. And you're making delicious wines. You guys are making delicious wines, so just want to give you props for that. So.
Yeah, thank you. That means a lot.
Um, all right, then let's talk about the actual wine itself. Tell us a little bit about how you ended up at this vineyard, the Zephaniah,
Yeah,
uh,
Zephaniah.
Zephaniah vineyard in why Loudoun County. Is there something you guys are particularly looking in that direction, or just happen to be where the grapes that you guys found? And tell us a little bit more about the makeup of this wine, the winemaking and the actual grape varieties that went in there. And we can look at the pictures if you want to. Whenever you want to look at those pictures, let me know, and I'll put them up on the screen.
Sure, yeah. Yeah, yeah, if you want to pull those up, we
Okay.
totally can look at them now. I sent some pictures of the three named varieties on the back of the label, so we can kind of peek at those. They look very different from each other, which is kind of fun. But yeah, why Loudoun County is a very interesting question. So this is a picture. These three pictures actually are from the day that we picked the fruit in 23. So this fruit is in your bottle. But this is Chardonnay right there in front of you. Chardonnay, as you might guess from the name, is related to Chardonnay. It was bred in Geneva, New York, at there's an agricultural research center that like is kind of a shared facility between the state of New York and Cornell University. And it was bred there as a cross between Chardonnay, which was one of the parents, and a hybrid white grape called Seyval Blanc, which is an older white grape. It was bred in France in response to the phylloxera crisis. I don't know if you folks have talked about phylloxera before.
Yeah.
If anyone needs a refresher, basically this pesky little root louse got introduced on some cuttings that were being sent from North America to Europe. And none of the European grapevines have resistance to this louse, and it infects the roots as well as the leaves, and kills the root system and kills the vines. So it wiped out a bunch of Europe's native grapes, and the industries there had to scramble to figure out what to do. One of the approaches was hybridizing European grapevines with these North American native vines that had co-evolved with phylloxera and therefore had a resistance to them. So that's where Seyval Blanc came from, came out of that effort. Seyval has a little bit more of a green aromatic side, like it can be a little herbaceous. I find in a very pleasant way, but some folks aren't always the biggest fan of it. It can be very green fruited, sort of like kiwi, lime, melon. And And I think that some of that Seyval parentage, some of that aromatic quality comes through in the Chardonnay. I think there's a bit of a tropical green streak here in this wine, and I think that's from the Chardonnay that you're looking at. But what it does get from its Chardonnay parent is that just lovely kind of Chardonnay blank canvas quality. Chardonnay has so many masks that it can wear, and it responds so so well to different winemaking styles, and can just show up in completely different styles depending on what you want to do with it. It's kind of a winemaker's dream grape in some ways. In that capacity, it lets you kind of show off your cellar skills. So Chardonnay, like its Chardonnay parent, it has that capacity to have that nice texture and that size in the mouth, that just like layered quality on the palate, which is really one of the reasons that appealed to us about working with it. We love textured whites. We love whites that have some, some weight in the mouth, and you kind of get, sometimes when it comes to European wine grapes, you have to choose between texture and acid. And a lot of the, most textural European white wine grapes are also a little lower acid, and sometimes the wines are less vibrant. But the native grape genetics all provide really high, like a tendency to be quite high acid. So we really like the way that Chardonnay has that texture, but also holds that acidity. It can be really pretty.
Nope, that's not it.
So this grape, this is the Vidal Blanc in the blend. Vidal Blanc is like Chardonnay's Seyval Blanc parent. It's an older French hybrid. I'm obsessed with the way that these clusters look. They always have this like very skinny, long kind of quality. They look just like kind of cylindrical. They're very long and tightly packed and skinny and thin. And they always have this like slightly pinkish blush, which is really pretty. Vidal is a later ripening variety than Chardonnay. And so we pick it on the same day when it is not ripe enough to make a balanced wine on its own, but as a minority component of the blend, it helps us ensure that we get that like nice, fresh, crunchy acid backbone. And then this little guy is Valvin.
So cute.
Looks so different from the other two, right? So Valvin Muscat is a Muscat variety that also comes out of that research station in Geneva in New York. Yeah, you get these like bright green berries. They almost look, they're like I don't know if you've ever seen Sauvignon Blanc clusters, but they're super green even when they're really ripe. And this kind of has that same shade of green. They're really small clusters. They're compact. They're so juicy. They're a little lower acid, and they're just like vibrant and aromatic and delicious. So the vintage that you're drinking has just a couple percent of Valvin Muscat. We didn't want it to smell or taste, notably muscatty in a way that extracted from the other. We were really trying to show off what Chardonnay could do, and the other grapes are kind of the support staff in this scenario. But we wanted to have a little bit in the blend just for a little bit of a floral touch, a little bit of aromatic complexity. So the 25 vintage, which is we just wrapped up our vintage a couple of weeks ago, so I'm finally getting some rest for the first time in a while. But the 24 vintage actually has a higher percentage of Valvin Muscat this time, so we're gonna play with getting a little more tropical and floral this year and see where it takes us.
As somebody who is very sensitive to Muscat, I really appreciate just the perfect touch, just like the smidgen of grandma's potpourri here that I love.
And then you might be asking yourself, what on earth are those red grapes doing? So if you saw the back label, you might notice that it has a very vague mention on the back label that says 2% table grapes. So all of these grapes are grown in the same vineyard. So this wine is what's called a field blend. We pick all the fruit on the same day. And instead of blending the different varieties together in the cellar after they've fermented and aged, they all get blended together and ferment together and spend their whole life together. We think that co-fermenting different varieties like that creates a more integrated and complete wine than blending them after the fact. in this vineyard, there's one weirdo row planted to these experimental hybrid table grape varieties that came out of a breeding program in the University of Arkansas. They have nutty names like Neptune and Mars and Marquis and gosh, I'm forgetting Everest is I think the last one. Um, and because I don't know, we have an affinity for freaks and outcasts, we always pick this row into the blend kind of just for fun. So our hunch, these grapes taste super like they have a lot of a grape species called Vitis labrusca in them. Vitis labrusca is where, like the most famous example you probably are familiar with is Concord, that Welch's grape juice, like musky, floral, dusty, kind of just like grape candy aromatic quality. That is what Vitis labrusca produces aromatically, and these grapes taste like that. So kind of we think about them similarly to the Muscat, where we don't on its own, it can be quite overwhelming. But we pick a couple percentage of a couple percent by volume of the blend is made up of these grapes that we pick, and we think it just contributes a little to the complexity of the overall wine. And then this is Perry and Alyssa. This is their contribution to today's tasting, is being here via this picture. This is them stomping. So um, we we don't use a crusher or a destemmer for any of our wines. Everything is crushed by foot. It's a more gentle way of extracting, and it ensures that you don't accidentally crack seeds open when you crack seeds open with a mechanical crusher, which even on its gentlest setting kind of can happen sometimes. You start extracting much harsher tannins. And the oldest way to do it is still, from a style perspective, from our perspective, the best way to do it is you hop in there and you stomp it up. So for everyone concerned, yes, we do sanitize our feet beforehand. And yeah, depending on how thick the skins of the grapes are, it takes anywhere between like 30 minutes to an hour to get it good and stumped up.
Oh wow, you got cheddar for 30 minutes to an hour.
Yeah, yep.
Yeah.
So in the wine you're tasting right now, about a third of the blend is tread by foot this way and left to soak on the skins overnight, whereas two-thirds are pressed off immediately. Um, so like similarly to the way that we compose the blend of grapes in order to provide kind of balance and buffers so that you get the acid of the less ripe Vidal to make sure you're providing some acidity to balance out the like texture of the riper Chardonnay. The way that we process the fruit in the cellar follows those same logics of like trying to balance and trying to provide buffers. So we direct press most of the fruit to get that really nice incisive acidity. Pressing directly preserves more acidity than letting fruit macerate on the skins. But then we let some of the fruit macerate on the skins because it extracts a little bit of tannin. So the point is not at all for this to drink like an orange wine. You're not tasting tannin in the glass, but you get a little bit of tannin extracted in this process, which just sort of helps fill out the body. Time on the skins also extracts nutrition from the grapes, which leads to healthier fermentations. It's much easier to have like healthy, clean fermentations with grape or with juice that's macerated for a while than juice that's been pressed directly. We only use native yeast and we don't add any sulfur until the very end of the process, right before bottling. We add a tiny bit of sulfur. So it's very important for us to encourage a healthy fermentation. And then also you just get a little more aromatic complexity. You're pulling out some of that muscat tropicality, you're pulling out some of that like really juicy ripe stone fruit from the Vidal and the Chardonnay. So again, it's all about balance.
Uh,
Trying to think
sorry, go ahead.
I don't know, just trying to think what else. I feel like you asked some questions that I didn't get to answering.
I was asking about the Loudoun County. How did you end up Loudoun? How did you end up sourcing fruit? What was that process like
Yeah.
to find fruit in Virginia?
So I mean, you'll hear winemakers and sommeliers and everyone in between talk sort of endlessly about the importance of site, that like that, you know, you have to have some very special vineyard site to make good wine. And well, I think that that's true to some extent, that you know, there are like sites that have certain topography and geology and climate that makes it easier to make good wine. I really think that the human element is really the most important. If you're once your site has checked certain boxes, and which is to say, really only that you have a site where grapes can ripen, which is not an incredibly high threshold to pass. Once you've passed that, as long as you put time and care and love into your grapes as a farmer, you can grow good fruit that makes interesting wine. So we're not, when we look for folks to source from, we're not necessarily seeking out a specific subregion of Virginia. You know, we don't have in mind like we really want to work in Loudoun County, which is in the northern part of Virginia. As much as it is that, you know, we get introduced to different growers and we talk to them about their practices, and when we have a good feeling about the person, then we go and see the site, and we look at what they're doing in the vineyard, and then we kind of move from there. So it wasn't something so much about Loudoun County specifically as it was that we really love the Hatches, Bill and Tremaine Hatch, who farm this vineyard. They're father and son, and they're lovely folks to work with, and they're really, really excellent viticulturists. That said, I think it is a little pleasing to me. We currently make 3 different wines. And they're from the big 3 winemaking regions in Virginia. So it is kind of fun that we have a little bit of something from each region. This wine is from Northern Virginia. We make a rosé from the Shenandoah Valley. It's a rosé chiefly of Chambourcin, which is a red hybrid. And then we make a muscadine, which is a native grape. It's not even a hybrid, from Southern Virginia. So even though we weren't like seeking out you know, something to represent each of the big 3 kind of grape growing regions in Virginia, it is, I think, fun that we have sort of the cross section of the state
Yeah,
cultural.
that's cool. Now that you know you've made wine in Finger Lakes, you've made wine in Colorado, Argentina, Germany, and you've what 4 vintages under your belt in this region in Middle Atlantic at this point. Yeah.
Third, yeah.
Um, what, in your opinion, having worked with Virginia grapes for some time, for a little bit of time now, what are some kind of advantages that you see with Virginia, opportunities, advantages that you see, and what are some current challenges that you see with Virginia?
Totally. Um, I think, um, yeah, that's a really good question. I think that I mean, the Mid-Atlantic remains an incredibly difficult place to grow grapes um, organically, or without using synthetic sort of fungicides. Um, and so, other than the muscadine, actually, the 2 other wines we make, including this one, do get sprayed with a little bit of synthetic fungicides. And we only work with growers who we feel like are amenable to changing their practices over time. And as you know, as we make it clear to them that we're you know, good partner to do business with, and we can make something reliably beautiful with their fruit, that, you know, hopefully they'll work with us and farm more in line with our values. So that's kind of part of how we select our growers too, is folks we think that you know, we can collaborate with and push towards organic farming. And so yeah, you know, the farming itself is really difficult. The climate is so humid, and there's a lot of fungal pressure, especially from a fungus called black rot, which even the resistant varieties, like these hybrid varieties, are really resistant to a couple of fungal diseases called powdery mildew and downy mildew. They do really well against them. They have really good resistance to these diseases compared to European wine grapes. But even these hybrid varieties don't have phenomenal resistance to black rot. So it's just a really hard region to grow in, and we know some folks who are growing organically, and we know that it's possible. We ourselves don't have access to land at this point, so we can't just call all the shots. But growing organically takes a lot of time, a lot of hand, very very painstaking kind of hand labor, vine by vine, individual scale work, and it's really hard, and you have to really really care about doing it, and doing it the right way. So um, that's, I think, the biggest challenge is this, grape growing. Even with these varieties that are much easier to grow here, it's still you have to really want to do it to make it happen. Um, I think the biggest um, benefit, though, is that um, the varieties that grow best here um, aren't varieties that are closely associated famously with some different region.
Mm,
And that, like, as much as I have, I've had some Virginia grown Bordeaux blends that were phenomenal, excellent.
mhm,
But as long as folks are drinking those and comparing them to Bordeaux itself, um, it's going to be harder to tell a compelling story about Virginia as a region. Um,
yeah,
Whereas the muscadines, for instance, which are a native grape species, the kind of northernmost extent of their range is sort of around the DC area, around the Chesapeake region. And they grow all the way south to Central Florida and all the way across the Gulf. They love heat and humidity, and they produce flavors that you can't taste anywhere else in the world. There's no there's no like shining example that they can pale in comparison next to somewhere in France, because no one in France grows these grapes. So there's a real opportunity, I think, to create wines that taste like wines from nowhere else. And that, to us, is one of the biggest promises of this region. Is there's there's so much like defining that's yet to be done of what this region can do, what it's about. Um, Virginia is sort of in this awkward place that's very exciting, I think, where it's established enough that there's attention on it. And I don't know if you know this, Ong, but the this year's diploma WSET essay is about Virginia wine. So the world is paying attention, but it's still young enough in many ways and underestablished enough in many ways that there's a real opportunity to kind of make a statement and make an intervention into what this region is and what it stands for. And I think that, like, uh, not us alone, but us and some of the like-minded producers we are close with in this region. We have a clear vision of what it can be, and I think people are jumping on board, which we're very excited about.
it's amazing. I mean, I took my diploma like 10 years ago at this point, but just the possibility, just the thought of that Virginia being a diploma essay question is unthinkable.
Yeah.
So the fact that it is on the WCT's radar 10 years later is pretty remarkable. So, speaks volume to the growth rate and prominence of the Virginia wine industry for sure. Uh, Finally, just about tasting the wine. I don't know if you have the wine yourself, but if not, that's totally fine. But yeah, I always like tasting the wine with a winemaker, even though you're a little different because you've also had like wine buyer role. I've always, whenever I taste wine with a winemaker, it's always fun to see because they're always like, yeah, we taste wines differently. Like as sommeliers, you're always looking for like ways to pair food, ways to like make the wine shine. Where does the wine shine? As a winemaker, I'm always making sure there's nothing is fucked up. So I'm always looking for fault and something that went wrong, But you have both those experiences. But yeah, just kind of walk. I'm sure you're very familiar with the flavor profile of this wine, but yeah, walk us through kind of like what sticks out to you. What are some of the things that we should look out for? Like there's some things that I really like about this wine, but yeah, just want to see if how
Totally.
you taste wine, how I taste wine, kind of align.
Yeah. Um, yeah, so I mean, it's uh like you said, when I'm tasting as a winemaker, mostly I'm tasting anxiously, which is to say I'm tasting with fear in my heart that something is wrong. It's taken me a very long time to be able to taste wines that I've like made myself, even somewhat objectively. I think I still can't, but
Yeah.
back when I got started in the wine industry, if I made a wine, I for sure hated it.
Yeah.
No matter what other people said, if I made it, I thought it was awful because I was so in my head about it. I had a really funny experience the other day of like opening a bottle that I made when I was at Jack Upper Hill in Western Colorado, which is now several years ago, like five, almost no, 4 years ago. And I was like, whoa, this, wait a second, this is kind of good. Like removed enough finally from the personal side of it that I could taste it for the first time. Um, but yeah, so just some things to, I don't have a bottle open with me right now, but I did open a bottle for some bar some wine bars yesterday. So I actually sort of in my recent memory, but some things to look out for here. I'm kind of going to tie it back into what we were saying our mission statement is, which is to make the best wine possible with what the grapes want to do. So we try to make this wine in a way that follows what the grapes are asking for instead of forcing something onto the grapes. So part of what hybrid grapes have a bad reputation for is being too high acid and kind of thin in the mouth. These are things that kind of infamously hybrid grapes tend to produce when you make wine with them. Um, but there are ways to accommodate that. So we actually pick this fruit quite early and higher acid than it has to be and thinner than it could be if it were riper. And part of that is to kind of prove that if you make the wine in a way that accommodates its traits rather than fights against them, that you can get something balanced and interesting. So if acid and thinness are the problem, there's a couple of tools that winemakers have at our disposal to work with that. So um, uh, if a wine is too high acid and the acid is too intense, um, one of the first things you do is just let it naturally go through malolactic fermentation and see if that settles things out, balances things out. So a lot of the hybrid white grapes are what is called maloblocked, which means they either sterile filter or add enough sulfur dioxide to stop the malolactic bacteria from converting malic acid into the softer, gentler, kind of creamier, richer lactic acid. Um, and we don't do that at all. We let the wine go through mallow, which sort of balances out the acidity. And so one of the things you might see is some of that creaminess from the malolactic fermentation. That's something you might notice as you're tasting. We keep working with the lees, which are the lees are the yeast, the spent yeast and bacteria that settle down to the bottom of the fermenter after fermentation is over. We keep working with the lees long after fermentation. So we do a lot of what's called lees stirring, or the French term for it is batonnage. Which means we keep the wine on the full lees, and we use a kind of steel wand. We put it in the barrel. We kind of whip it around and stir the lees up. And the more that you do that, the more that the lees have contact with the wine, you start extracting some of these compounds, some of these molecules from these spent yeast that have a kind of uh, our main goal is to have the textural effect of these things. So you get more creaminess, you get more roundness, which jointly balances out that acidity that people consider a problem and creates more body and mouthfeel, which people say hybrid grapes lack. The the aromatic and like flavor profile effect of this is a sort of cheesy breadiness that you might notice here. So we want to make wines that showcase the fruit, and there's lots of fruit aromas to speak of. But you might be getting some of that like umami kind of cheese rind, breadcrumb quality on the nose and on the palate as well, and that's a result of long lees aging and the batonnage of the lees. And then we also ferment and age all of our wines in old wood barrels instead of stainless steel. So that gentle oxidation through the barrel over the aging process rounds out the wine as well, creates a fuller mouthfeel, and similarly kind of makes that concern about the wine being too thin, makes that go away. So you might get a little bit of wood on this wine too. The barrels are all older. We don't use any new wood because, again, we don't want to crowd out the, just the appeal of the fruit itself. But you might be getting a little bit of a touch of wood on the nose too. From a fruit sort of sensory perspective, I think that because Chardonnay is the majority of the blend, you would reasonably expect this to smell and taste more like Chardonnay than the other grapes in the blend. And I think Chardonnay's Seyval parentage really comes through in this wine. In this wine, like I said earlier, you might remember Seyval has a bit of a green side to it. It can have kind of a musk melon, kiwi fruit, lime sort of quality, and I think there's a nice green aromatic fruit quality here. But you also get a little bit of that, nice Chardonnay, lemony, lemon peel citrus. And I think too, there's sometimes I notice a bit of a kind of like peach ring quality on this wine, which I think is Vidal's contribution. Vidal famously is it makes, when you let it get nice and ripe, Vidal makes these wines that just are like this a juicy white peach. So I think some of that's going on there too. And you might notice a smidge of that kind of that florality. It's not at all supposed to be the main picture of the wine, but that's Valvin Muscat kind of peeking its head around the corner there.
Awesome. Yeah, I mean, what struck me when I tasted this wine with you, and still now today, is yeah, I mean, it makes so much sense that all the work that you put in to build a texture, and with some of that texture as well as some of the aromatics that were in there. Like that's where I say there's a lot of the kind of northern, not northern, like Rhone white kind of aspect to it, that kind of like fleshy, like a richer, creamier kind of the body to it. But what I love about it is that it doesn't lack any of that acid. There's that kind of a very rigid steering acid backbone that keeps it light and bright, and that's, to me, there's a lot of that, like that. I don't know why my mind goes Alsace, but there's a lot of like similar things that I see about Alsatian quality here. So those things kind of melding here together. So it's basically the way I would love these kind of fleshy, big texture whites that you mentioned, and all the kind of steely whites that I really also love, and then like they're like combined somehow in the middle, and which what I love about it. There's a lot going on here. It's not just like while it can easily be just a delicious white wine here, but even for like a wine nerd, you can come back here and kind of pick out different aspects of it, because yes, there's a sign of that MLF, there's a sign of that Batonage, there's a sign of that neutral wood, and all of that in here. So again, good job, dude. Like this is cool. Like it's delicious and it's cool. Um, I always like to kind of ask some quick fire questions at the end of these sessions, if you're up for it, Peter. I know we have you till 9:30, but uh, the first question, this is a question that we ask to every member that ever joined the 6 Foot Wine Club.
Okay.
This one is what was your gateway wine? What was your epiphany wine? And what is the wine that you take with you to deserted island where chilling is not a problem? Imagine you can chill out anywhere, which doesn't make any goddamn sense, but just
It's the desert island with a refrigerator on it.
correct.
My gateway wine. So I went to I studied wine in college, and that program, really emphasized conventional winemaking. It was super interventionist, super, wine by the numbers. We were always in the lab analyzing wines, figuring out what we needed to add or take away to make it, perfect from a data perspective. And I was really starting to lose my love of wine because that just didn't connect with how I thought about wine and how I thought about food and how I thought about agriculture. And there was there's a immediacy and rawness that I like in wine that making wine that way kind of takes away. So um, I got introduced to the world of natural wine um, uh, basically by accident. I was in the middle of my wine education, and I was kind of losing steam, and I picked up a bottle on a shelf at a wine shop in the Finger Lakes. That was a variety I'd never heard of at that point, a variety called Trepat, which is grown in Catalonia. It's quite rare in the US to find varietal bottlings of this wine, of this grape. If you've had it before, uh, not as a varietal bottling, you might have accidentally had it in cava, because it's one of the allowable varieties in rosé cava to make it pink. But it's a sort of thin-skinned, light-bodied red from a hot region. I'd never heard of it, and I thought the wine was like $17, which now that same wine is much more expensive now. But that's that's how it goes. And I thought 17, like I remember thinking this was a splurge. I was a broke college student. I was like, $17. Like, I don't know if I can spend that on a bottle of wine, but it seems cool, and I want to try something new. And I took it home, and it just blew my mind. It was so, it was not a perfect wine. It had a little bit more Brettanomyces actually than I probably liked. It had that kind of like barnyardiness to the max in a way that wasn't super balanced. It was just exploding with energy. It was so lively and interesting and engaging. And that just sort of changed the path of everything forever to me. So that was really
God damn it, Peter. Of course your gateway is fucking trip hop, varietal trip hop. Like who has a varietal trip hop as their gateway? Why this is
that's
amazing.
well, that's my gateway natural wine at least, right? So
Mm.
my epiphany wine, um, gosh, that's such a good question. I mean, I think that my epiphany wine is probably something from La Gargista in Vermont.
Mm.
Um, I don't know if you folks have had these wines before. La Gargista is a phenomenal producer in central Vermont, up in the mountains. And this is a woman named Deirdre Heeken, who is an amazing person as well. She's a phenomenal writer. She's one of the kindest people I've ever met in wine, which is an industry kind of rife with people who are eager to show you that they're smarter and cooler than you. And she's the exact opposite, welcoming and wonderful, generous person. But she makes amazing wines from hybrid grapes in Vermont. And when she started this project, she was kind of told, like, you're losing your mind, like you can't do this. You can't farm biodynamically in on the East Coast. And she set about to prove them wrong, and she has some of the most lively, beautiful vineyards I've ever seen in my life, and her wines are just amazing. And I think they're my epiphany wines, in as much as drinking these was sort of the first time that I realized, like, oh wow, all that hybrid grape slander is nonsense. Like,
Yeah.
if you just farm them well and make the wine intentionally, you can get something really special. And of course, it's super different um, from um, European grape wines. But why would you want it to be the same at all? Different is good. Variety is amazing. So
Yeah.
that's my epiphany. And my desert island wine um, is this is I feel like people think this is ridiculous sometimes, but I think uh, everyone will come to see the light someday. My desert island wine is Merlot. Um,
Oh my God.
yeah, especially some older Merlot based Bordeaux. I mean, come on, I'll drink that any day of my life. So um, I know that's probably not the answer you expected, because it's a
No.
little bit
You know
normal.
what? For this will be the first time where 3 out of 3, that is like, what? Like I cannot believe that's your answer, but honestly, I'm not surprised at all. I wouldn't expect anything less from you, Peter. That is fantastic. Love it. Love it. Uh, one more quick fire question. If there was a metaphorical billboard where 1 billion people drive by it every day and see it, and you can put on anything you want up there, a picture, message, whatever. What would you put on there?
Are you asking me as as an individual or me as a representative of Spinning Wheel Wines?
Whatever. You choose. You choose.
Oh man. Well, uh, we've been designing some merch recently for Spinning Wheel. Our first merch drop is imminent, and uh, we're making some really goofy T-shirts that say "Don't talk to me till I've had my mallow," um, which we think is corny as hell, and we like keep saying it to each other. We're obsessed. It's ridiculous. But anyway, that's my spinning wheel billboard. Don't talk to me till I've had my mallow.
Love it. Love it. Well, Peter, thank you so much for coming on. This has been fucking great. You guys are doing something cool. I've said this so after tasting the wine. It's not just the wine. The wine in itself is solid. It's delicious. But I am more excited about kind of the mission statement. You guys are trying to say something. Like there's something that you're trying to different story that you're trying to tell with this wine, which is super cool and admirable. So thank you for putting out this product and thank you for joining us today. I really appreciate you.
Yeah, thank you all of you for drinking the wine, and thanks for the chance to have it in the club and listen to me yammer about hybrid grapes for an hour. I appreciate you all, and yeah, don't hesitate to reach out if you have questions or comments or just want to chat. You can find me on Instagram, or you can my personal Instagram, or Spinning Wheel Wines. And yeah, drop a note if you want to stay in touch.
Yeah, actually, that's what I was going to ask. How can people follow Spinning Wheel, you, kind of what you're up to? Yeah, what's the best way?
Yeah, yeah, you can find us on Instagram at Spinning Wheel Wines. We're not our Instagram is a little bit under designed right now. It's kind of we need to be a little more intentional. It's kind of a collection of like, oh, when there's an event, we post something, and we need to do a better job of kind of intentionally telling the story of what we're up to. But that's a work in progress, and some things are on the corner when it comes to that. But we're always on it. All three of us have access to the account, so like you text us, and like someone sees it almost right away. um and we love to chat with folks. And you can follow me on Instagram, PK Szilagyi. My last name is Szilagyi. And yeah, happy to chat wine anytime, anywhere. Just reach out, and yeah.
And if you have a few more minutes, I would love to at least give an opportunity for people to ask questions if they have any questions for you right now.
I have no
Does
one to
anybody have questions for Peter about spinning wheels, Virginia, making wine in Virginia? Peter himself? I don't know.
I guess so I have a question. More broadly, mid-Atlantic wine. Like, what would you say is the main difference between Virginia and Maryland wine? Do things, does wine respect state boundaries? Is it, obviously there's the Piedmont Plateau goes through, there's like different regions that are kind of similar in both states, but there does seem to be, Virginia wine is much more recognized and talked about. Maryland wine, and I think even Pennsylvania and West Virginia are growing wine. And so kind of broader region, how do you see that distinction?
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think that if we listen, one of the most important lessons that wine has to teach us is that borders are fake. This lesson is a little less urgent when it comes to the border between Maryland and Virginia, but it's, in some ways quite urgent and politically loaded elsewhere in the world. I think that there's very little distinction between, very little like night and day absolute distinction between what Maryland and Virginia are capable of. And there's folks growing grapes in Montgomery County, right across the Potomac from Loudoun County. And it's excellent fruit, and they make really good wine with it. So if you folks haven't checked out Rockland's farm in Poolesville, Maryland, it's worth checking out. And it kind of to your point, they are kind of state agnostic when it comes to where they're sourcing their grapes. They fruit from Virginia, and they ferment fruit from Maryland, and they make delicious stuff with all of it. Obviously, there are small differences. I mean, Maryland has sort of less elevation. Even when you're getting up in the mountains, you're not quite at the same elevation that you are in Central Virginia. So elevation plays a big role in wine, and there are different soil types that crop up through the different states as well. So definitely different potential. They're not just the same, but yeah, we've sort of over the last couple of years. Our first vintage, we actually worked with a little bit of Maryland fruit, and then we thought maybe it'd make a clearer story to just work with Virginia fruit, but we've sort of been reassessing that over the last few years as we realized that maybe that distinction is not super important to what we want to try to communicate. And I think that you highlighted that Virginia is more established as a region, and I think that that's true for sure, but really not for any good reason. I mean, I think that Virginia's winemaking industry has even though it's gotten much better in the last 10, 15 years, even before that, it had some cachet because it was like kind of easy to market this idea of like America's first wine industry that was founded by the genius Thomas Jefferson. But, I think obviously like that's bullshit. Thomas Jefferson never made any wine himself. Talented enslaved people made wine that he took credit for, and Thomas Jefferson himself was a slaveholding racist. So I don't think that there's any good reason to perpetuate the idea that Virginia is like uniquely suited to making good wine that the neighboring states are not. I think and I think that Virginia wine deeply needs to get away from using Jefferson as its sort of marketing ploy.
For many reasons.
Yes, for sure.
Any other questions?
I have
a couple things. Sorry, go ahead, Dan.
Yeah, I mean, I have a question that's maybe too broad. But I do a lot of work right now in like climate change adaptation. And when you think about that in terms of agriculture, like you'll talk about farmers switching to like more heat resistant or drought resistant varieties of wheat. But when like just thinking about, viniculture, consumers are very sort of wedded to varietals where a consumer of like bread doesn't really care what kind of wheat, they're being produced. So like, how do you see the role of these new sort of like hybrid varieties spreading when, consumers are sort of wedded to these traditional varieties? Like and what's your role as like a winemaker in sort of making that transition?
Yeah. I mean, that's an excellent question, and it brings up a really interesting point, right? And I think you've summed it up well. Is like you plant a experimental perennial cereal crop that has deeper roots and can access more water, and you make beer or wine or beer or bread with it, and nobody cares. But you plant a grape variety, the name of which folks don't know, and suddenly they don't want to buy it. It is strange that the variety of grape functions as sort of a brand on its own. It's a kind of quite unique agricultural product in that sense. I will say that I think that your average drinker is more adventurous than beverage industry professionals give them credit for. I think that it's very interesting. We do tastings that are public facing, where we chat about folks with the wine, and we get to watch in real time as they react to trying it for the first time. And we do tastings, professionally with buyers at bars, restaurants, shops, etc. And the same, sometimes buyers have reservations about bringing these wines on because they're afraid that someone won't recognize it on a list. And yet when we pour them for consumers directly, once people taste it and they know right away whether they like it or not, their senses tell them perfectly clearly whether they enjoy it, and it doesn't matter to them what it says on the label. So I think that a lot of the resistance to like new grape varieties or unfamiliar grape varieties actually starts in the industry itself. And the idea that only certain varieties can make wines worth drinking is reinforced all the time by beverage professionals. And I think that if beverage professionals were willing to be more out on a limb and just advocate for the things they care about and advocate for their values via their beverage programs, that drinkers would follow suit. That's sort of my, that's my overarching kind of conception of how this works.
Yeah, I mean, I personally think it is also an uphill battle, but I do agree with Peter that the general, and I think there's some sort of demographic divide here too. Younger people they tend to be a lot more adventurous, tend to try more. So, which speaks volume about possibility, about as they get older, they become higher spending wine consumers. What does that mean if they want to try more different things? But to what Peter's saying, I think it kind of starts with things like this, where somebody who's willing to, instead of go make typical Virginia wines that could probably sell for maybe even more than what he can charge for here, but he decides to make wines with a hybrid and native varieties, and then tasting a skeptical wine buyer like me and convincing him enough that he's going to feature on the wine club and send it out to people like you guys, where you taste it and be like, oh shit, maybe Virginia wines are not shit, and maybe hybrid Virginia wines are actually quite great. And yeah, totally. I mean, I think it's a lot to, and I think the wine industry is moving in that direction, particularly in the younger natural wine territory, where wine buyers, like the wine program, is seen more as kind of I don't know, a reflection of one's values and just kind of like their style, is as opposed to 10, 15, 20 years ago, where the wine lists almost look exactly the same. They all carry the same brands that would sell. So yeah, I think it's a slow change, but I think that's how we hopefully eventually get to the place where these things are a little more accepted than others. And maybe, just maybe, in the future, where if the global warming gets so bad that maybe we can't ignore it, where the native variety or the anything but hybrid is just so hard to farm that people are like, fuck, I can't do this anymore. So, yeah. Any other questions?
Well, I guess just building on that, like, is there the thought experiment of like, will people stick with the I only drink a Sangiovese from Tuscany, and that's all I want to ever drink, and in 30 years, they can't really grow it there, and what does grow is 130. At what point does someone's wallet trump their clinging to a varietal if it becomes so expensive that, or there's so little of it? So it'll be interesting to see how both
Yeah.
adaptive agriculture, but also the market kind of dictates that. And there's a limited quantity, it's hard to grow, it's going to get incredibly expensive, people are going to get priced out.
Absolutely.
Already happening to some extent. 10 years ago, everyone turned to Beaujolais because it was so affordable, and now all these producers that people adore, the wines cost about the same as a bottle of red Burgundy, and so there's always sort of this weird market evolution that a lot of what's exciting a lot of what's exciting actually comes out of something, you know, quite frustrating, which is that the market eventually like locks people out of access to the things that were exciting in the past. But I would like to believe that we have the capability to tell the right stories in the right ways and convince folks of the value of these things before they become their only option. I would like not to see it become accepted only because of necessity, but we'll see, I guess.
Yeah. Peter, there's a request been made for a merch link if you have any to drop. So let me know and then I'll send that to the group. For those of you who want to buy Don't Talk to Me Before I Have My Mallow t-shirt.
Perfect. Yeah.
And,
I also have one more very quick question.
Yeah.
If like, I don't want to keep you, but you mentioned like when talking about the field blend, like the co-fermentation of like all the fruits at once instead of fermenting and then blending. How do you feel about sort of co-fermenting grapes and other things? I can't remember when was it Trodenvale, who's also in Virginia.
Trottenvale, yeah, in Virginia.
Trottenvale. That like that sort of what grows together goes together, not traditional like just wine this fermented beverages, which obviously the TTB like that can get you in, you know, like what can you call it legally, what's on the label, but how do you feel about grape plus other stuff?
I feel very good about them. Yes, it's very interesting. I mean, some of the, you know, the oldest archaeological evidence for fermented grape beverages suggests pretty strongly that they weren't made with just grapes, that they were co-fermentations of grapes and honey and grain and other fruits as well, perhaps. So there, you know, people have been throwing different sugar sources in the same vat and letting it all do its thing for a very, very long time. And I do think that, you know, when it comes to climate resilience, diversifying not just the types of grapes we grow, but the types of fruit we grow in general is a really, really smart move and may prove to be necessary. We made our first year a co-fermentation of apples and grapes. We made a red pet nat that we called Chaos and Mystery. It was about half and half York apples from an abandoned orchard in Virginia and Chamberson from Central Maryland, actually. And we really liked it. But we kind of, well, for reasons that are not interesting and are just purely about logistics, we didn't make it the last 2 years, but our plan is to make it again in the future. So we're very on board with multi-fruit co-ferments. Yeah, thanks for asking.
any other questions for folks? Excellent.
Merch wise,
What'd you say, Peter?
merch wise on the merch front, I will send the link when I have a link. We're making a little merch run, and we're gonna send a good chunk of the revenue from that down to Western North Carolina. Some very good friends of ours, one of the most inspiring wineries on the East Coast called Pleb Urban Winery. They lost their winery entirely in the flooding. The building is gone, and 3+ vintages of wine aging in that cellar, floating down a river. So some of it may go to support them. Some of it may go to kind of just wider mutual aid funds in the Western North Carolina region. So yeah, I'll share info about how to get merch and hopefully support those folks as well at the same time when I'm able to share it.
Cool, amazing. And I usually do this on a regular tasting, and maybe I should have done it before. Some folks have to take off, but we usually ask them about the wines and whether they liked them or did not like them, what they thought about it. I don't know if you want to hear about it. I'm sure you do. And then 2, we also play a game where how much do you think this costs on a retail shelf, and how much would you be willing to pay for, happy paying for this on a retail shelf, just to see how far off or how close they are to the actual cost of it. You are more than welcome to stick around for that. You don't have to, but usually we do. I don't know if that's something information that may be useful for you or not.
As a disclaimer, feel free to say that you didn't like the wine. I understand very well that everyone's palate is different, and I do not take it personally if you didn't enjoy it. So just I will stick around because I'm curious to hear what y'all say, but do not feel discouraged from telling the truth.
So what do you, yeah, what I'm curious. What did you guys think about this wine as well as, yeah, did everybody like this wine? Did anybody not like this wine?
I
And just
quite
general,
liked
any feedbacks or thoughts, surprises? You were like, holy shit, I didn't think it was going to be like this.
I quite liked it. I thought, I've had a bunch of Virginia wine, and this was more, it felt more elegant than most of what I've tried.
Mm,
My wife did not like it, but she
mm.
dislikes most Chardonnays, and Chardonnays are related. Like, she tasted, she's like, this is like a really good version of Chardonnay, but I just don't like Chardonnay. Chardonnay is a commentary. But yeah, I thought it was really well put together. So congratulations.
I really like I think just the 2%, like those touches of other things brought like a florality and a tropicalness, and then I think it like Hadley and I both were just saying that like it really changed as it warmed up. Like we brought it out, like I totally forgot to have it fridge, so I like put it in the freezer in the ice like right when I got home.
Too cold.
So it was really cold and really tight, and it just the way it opened up as the night went on was super interesting, and like getting the mallow and the cheese, like the Parmesan rind and like pasta water kind of notes. Yeah, no, it was very cool.
Oh, any other comments? No haters, huh? You fucking liars. No, I'm just kidding. All right. How much do you think this wine is on a retail shelf? How much would you be happy paying for this on a retail shelf? Mm-mm-mm. 20, 25, 25, 25. Anyone else? Oh, also, while this is coming up, Peter, I understand the winemakers. I've noticed that winemakers tend to have a much more inflated numbers than I do or someone used to. But would you age this wine? If the answer is yes, how long would you age it?
Yeah, I mean, we don't make wine with the intention of the wine needing age, because I think wines that need age, although some of my favorite wines need some age, of course. Where our mission is inviting people into this thing that already has a bit of a kind of a high threshold to entry when it comes to just like feeling confident spending money on something I'm familiar with. So our goal is to make wines that are fresh and ready to drink out the gate. So I don't know for sure, and none of these wines have gotten old enough yet to tell you when they've stopped getting better, but the wines from 22 are just drinking better and better as time goes on. And I had a bottle of this open for like a week, and I was tasting it every day to see how it's changing. And how wine ages when it's open in the short term is not a perfect proxy for how it ages in a cellar with time, but it's a decent enough proxy, or at least tells you what's possible. And the wine, as far as I could tell, just kept tasting better. So my hope is that it certainly can age if anyone is brave enough to try it. We make the wine. We follow kind of protocols that are designed to make wine ageable. We do a lot of oxidation of the must before fermentation, which is one of it's a strategy that helps ensure the ageability of wines. So hopefully 5 years from now it's still going strong.
Yeah, I don't, especially with that acid that's on there. I don't see it falling apart in 5 years. I think it'd be perfectly fine. Whether it gets better or not, I'm not sure because I really enjoy the freshness of it right now. Is what I think is really appealing about this wine. But yeah, over the next 5 years, I don't think we'll have any problem drinking over it. All right, so the 2025, 25, 25, 25, 28, 29, and this on a retail shelf would be $24. So there you go, Peter. Do with the information as you wish. Very small sample size of 6 Foot Wine Club gave you higher than what you are currently pricing this wine for. So there you go. But yeah, $24 is where you're at.
Final question, because we've been on the sort of like thrust of sustainability for a while. What do you guys do with the pomace post pressing? I know in like a lot of European countries where they're in wine regions, there's the tradition of like making pomace brandy, be it, you know, Mar or Grappa, or in Spain, Arujo. And I feel like that's not something that has taken hold in the US. I think that, you know, we are a bourbon dominated country and don't take apple brandy has like a niche that might get bigger, but yeah, like would you ever make brandy with either your fermented wines or the pomace of a wine or from pressing?
The short answer is I'd love to. The longer answer is I would need someone who wants to tell me they'll buy it all before down that path. No, I mean, it's a very interesting point. You know, we compost the pomace, so it has a second life in the vineyard, but I would love to do something else with it. I'm not really confident enough in piquette to try to go down that path. I've had some piquettes that I found really, really lovely, actually. I think it's you know, make some really phenomenal stuff, but anytime I've tried to make piquette myself, it's been awful. So I don't want to foist that on anyone. When I worked in Western Colorado, actually, we were a joint winery and distillery. We had a beautiful hand-smithed Bavarian copper pot still sitting in a shed right there on the farm, and we made grappa with the pomace, and I loved doing it. I studied a tiny bit of distilling as part of my like winemaking coursework, but not nearly enough to like know how to do it professionally on my own. So it was a really cool chance to learn some of that and be taught by someone who knew what they were doing. And I really loved it. And it was, you know, it felt really satisfying to make a beautiful beverage with the pomace that we'd use for the wine. But I will tell you for sure, as someone who managed that inventory every day for quite a while, those cases of grappa sat around, and they mostly just decorated the
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, it's a phenomenal question, and I think in the meantime, getting folks to drink hybrid grape wines is enough of a challenge for us.
Baby steps. One master that, and
grappa tomorrow. We'll figure it out.
Once you get the marketing down for that, then the next challenge of converting American spirits habits. But
if I can figure out how to market grappa to Americans, then I'll finally be unstoppable. I'll know, that I'm.
I don't know a single person who has successfully pulled that off. Yeah,
I think the first key is not calling it grappa, because I think grappa just has like a very, at least for like, I think it's a generational thing that like old, like, and in the way that like, you know, the Chianti and the straw jug, or the bloom, what was it, the bloom moon? It's like it has this association with like cheap, like like gasoline-y spirits. Whereas, I think we don't have it here. So what did come in the 70s and 80s was not good. Whereas, like, Capovilla from Italy is some of like the best spirits I've ever had, like his eau de vies or his grappas. And
Yeah.
but yeah, no, some friends of mine and I are did a big pawpaw harvest and are attempting to make a pawpaw eau de vie. So that should be interesting. And if that works out at all, which the pawpaw mash is very thick and sludgy and not the ferment is fitful at this point. So we'll see how it goes. But if it works, I will definitely make sure to get some samples into your hands as a native fruit to the area. I feel like it aligns.
Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, super cool. I've had some interesting pawpaw brandy actually before.
Mhm.
I imagine it's difficult to make, but props to you. That's awesome. Yeah, I mean, I agree that good grappa is almost as good as any distilled spirit can be. I think that good grappa attains to the level of complexity that like agave spirits or rum are capable of that, really nothing else touches. Yeah, we'll see someday, maybe.
Someday. Well, Peter, you have been on here way longer than you needed to, or you expected to. So I mean, you are more than welcome to hang on a little longer if you want. But
No, the blast. I should probably head out, but I had a great time. Thanks for having me. Super fun to chat about the wine, and thanks again for the chance to share the wine and the story behind the wine with your community. So appreciate you folks.
amazing. Do you still have stock of this?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I mean, it won't be until beginning of next month that it will be offered on Case Club, but yeah, I just want people to be able to have an access to it.
We can totally make it happen. Just let me know.
Cool. Right on, Peter. Appreciate you. Always appreciate you, and then really appreciate you coming on tonight.
Totally. Have a good rest of your nights.
All right. Have a good night, man. All right. On that note.